The silver locket felt heavier in Tyler Mitchell's pocket as he walked through Portland's Pearl District that October afternoon, just like every day for the past month. The weight of his father's memory pressed against his chest with each step home from Multnomah County Library. Today marked exactly 4 years since Michael Mitchell had lost his battle with cancer, leaving behind a 12-year-old son in a world that suddenly felt too big and too dangerous. Tyler paused at the corner of Northwest 11th and Everett, watching his breath form small clouds in the crisp autumn air. The red brick buildings around him told stories of a city constantly reinventing itself, much like how he'd been trying to reinvent his own story since his father's death. His backpack, heavy with library books about journalism and investigative reporting, reminded him of the path his father had chosen, the path that had somehow made enemies Tyler was only beginning to understand. As he turned down the narrow alley behind Romano's trattoria, seeking his usual shortcut home, Tyler froze. Through the early evening shadows, he could see two men crouched beside a black Mercedes sedan. Detective Brian Walsh, whose photograph Tyler recognized from his father's old case files, was carefully placing packages wrapped in plastic beneath the vehicle's chassis. His partner, a younger officer Tyler didn't recognize, stood watch while checking his phone repeatedly. Tyler's heart hammered against his ribs as fragments of overheard conversations between his mother and her colleagues at the hospital suddenly made sense. Walsh wasn't just any detective. He was the one his father had been investigating before the cancer took over, the one whose corruption his father had died trying to expose. The men's voices carried clearly in the still air. "Those Romano bastards think they're untouchable," Walsh muttered as he secured the final package. "Tomorrow's raid will teach this whole city what happens when you don't play by my rules." His partner nodded nervously, glancing around the alley with the paranoid alertness of someone who knew they were crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Tyler pressed himself against the brick wall, his mind racing through the moral mathematics his father had taught him. Michael Mitchell had always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but doing what was right despite being terrified. The Romano family might have a reputation that made people whisper, but Tyler knew something the rest of Portland didn't. They had paid for his father's cancer treatments anonymously when their insurance ran out. They had sent flowers to the funeral with a card that simply read, "Good men deserve to be remembered." Now Detective Walsh was about to destroy them with planted evidence, and Tyler was the only witness who could stop it. His father's voice seemed to echo from the locket against his chest, asking the question that would define the next hour of Tyler's life and possibly change everything that followed. What would a good man do? The question hung in the autumn air like a challenge from beyond, demanding an answer that would either honor his father's memory or betray everything Michael Mitchell had died believing in. If courage can be found in the most unexpected places, like and subscribe to Heart Stories, where every voice matters and every choice can change the world. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because sometimes the smallest decisions create the biggest impacts. The heavy oak door of Romano's trattoria seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds as Tyler pushed against it with trembling hands. The warmth inside immediately wrapped around him, carrying the rich sense of garlic, basil, and red wine that had made this restaurant a Portland landmark for 3 generations. The maitre d', a thin man in an immaculate black suit, looked down at the 12-year-old boy with surprise and immediate concern. Tyler's voice came out smaller than he'd intended. "I need to speak with Vincent Romano. It's about something happening outside right now. Something dangerous." The maitre d's expression shifted from polite confusion to alarm. But before he could respond, a calm voice cut through the dinner conversation. "Let the boy approach." Vincent Romano sat at the corner table that was always reserved, surrounded by 4 other men in expensive suits. At 65, Vincent carried himself with the dignity of someone who had built something lasting in a world that usually rewarded quick profits over patient craftsmanship. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his hands, which rested calmly on the white tablecloth, bore the calluses of someone who had worked with those hands long before he'd learned to delegate. Tyler walked forward on unsteady legs, acutely aware that every conversation in the restaurant had stopped. The distance between the entrance and Vincent's table felt like crossing a bridge over a canyon, with no way back once he'd committed to the journey. As he drew closer, he could see the intelligence in Vincent's dark eyes, the way they assessed not just Tyler's words, but his character. "You're Sarah Mitchell's son," Vincent said, and it wasn't a question. Tyler nodded, surprised that this man knew his mother. 2 years ago, your mother worked 36 hours straight to save my grandson's life when he was brought into the emergency room. She refused to leave until she was certain he would recover. You have her eyes. The same determination. Tyler felt a rush of pride at the mention of his mother, followed immediately by the crushing weight of what he had to say. "Mr. Romano, there are police officers outside right now. They're putting things under your cars." "Detective Walsh and another man. They're planting evidence. I saw them do it." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The 4 men at Vincent's table tensed almost imperceptibly, their hands moving to positions that suggested they were prepared for various possibilities. But Vincent himself remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving Tyler's face. "You saw Detective Brian Walsh planting evidence under our vehicles," Vincent repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of each word. Tyler nodded, his throat too tight for speech. "And why would you risk yourself to warn us?" Vincent's voice carried genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver locket, holding it so Vincent could see the inscription on the back. "Michael Mitchell, 1975-2020. Seek truth, serve justice. My father was investigating Detective Walsh before he died. I think Walsh has been framing innocent people for years. And you're next on his list." Vincent's expression softened as he read the inscription. The Portland evening air crackled with tension as the unlikely procession emerged from Romano's trattoria onto Northwest 11th Avenue. Tyler walked between Vincent Romano and his mother Sarah, who had arrived with the emergency medical team that someone had called as a precaution. Her presence both comforted and terrified him, knowing that she too understood the danger of what they were about to expose. Detective Walsh had positioned himself near the black Mercedes with the practiced confidence of someone who had orchestrated this scene many times before. His backup team, 3 officers in tactical gear, flanked the line of luxury vehicles that belonged to the Romano family. But something in Walsh's posture had changed since seeing Tyler inside the restaurant. The swagger had been replaced by a rigid alertness that suggested a predator suddenly aware he might have become the prey. Vincent approached his Mercedes with deliberate slowness, making sure that the growing crowd of onlookers and the smartphones already recording could capture every moment. He knelt beside his vehicle and looked underneath, his expression growing very still as he saw what had been placed there. "Everyone needs to see this," Vincent called out, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. A young woman with a press badge pushed forward, her camera capturing Vincent as he pointed to the packages secured beneath the chassis. "Those are evidence bags. Official Portland Police Department evidence bags, complete with case numbers and chain of custody documentation." Walsh stepped forward aggressively, his voice rising. "Someone must have stolen those bags and planted them to frame my investigation. This is clearly a setup designed to make the department look corrupt." But his words sounded hollow even to his own officers, who had begun to step back as the implications became clear. Tyler felt his father's locket warm against his chest as he stepped forward, his young voice somehow carrying over the murmur of the crowd. "Detective Walsh, I saw you put those packages there. You and your partner. You said the Romanos thought they were untouchable and that tomorrow's raid would teach the whole city a lesson." Sarah moved to stand beside her voice steady and professional, despite the emotional storm Tyler could see in her eyes. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, a registered nurse at OHSU and formerly a police officer with the Portland Bureau. I've seen Detective Walsh's methods before. That's why I left law enforcement 7 years ago." The crowd pressed closer as Sarah continued speaking. "My husband, Michael Mitchell, was an investigative journalist who was building a case against Detective Walsh when cancer took his life. Michael documented a pattern of evidence planning targeting immigrant families, single mothers, and anyone who couldn't fight back effectively. Walsh's face had gone from confident to pale to flushed red with anger and desperation. He reached for his radio, but one of his own officers stepped forward. "Sir, I think we need to call Internal Affairs immediately, and probably the FBI." Vincent had continued his methodical examination of the other vehicles, each search revealing the same planted evidence, each discovery documented by a dozen different phones and cameras. The packages contained drugs that had been stolen from the police evidence room, each one marked with case numbers that could be traced back to Walsh's previous investigations. Tyler watched as his mother approached Detective Walsh directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had once worn the same uniform. "Brian, you've been doing this for years. How many innocent families have you destroyed? How many children have lost their parents to your planted evidence?" Walsh's response was to reach for his weapon, but the crowd had grown too large, the documentation too complete, and his own officers too aware of their own liability. Instead, he found himself surrounded not by the criminals he thought he was arresting, but by the community he had been systematically betraying. Vincent addressed the crowd, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. "The Romano family has operated in Portland for 3 generations. We've paid our taxes, employed hundreds of people, and contributed to this community because we love this city." Detective Walsh decided we didn't fit his vision of acceptable Portland citizens and chose to frame us rather than accept our legitimacy. As FBI vehicles began arriving, their sirens cutting through the evening air, Tyler realized that his father's final investigation was finally reaching its conclusion. Not through articles or courtroom testimony, but through a 12-year-old boy who had chosen courage over safety in a community that had chosen truth over convenience. The last thing Tyler heard before the federal agents took control of the scene was Vincent Romano speaking quietly to his mother. "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband's work lives on through your son. Tonight, justice delayed has finally become justice delivered." The federal courthouse in downtown Portland hummed with an energy that Tyler had never experienced before. 3 months after that October evening in the Pearl District, the investigation into Detective Brian Walsh had become the largest police corruption case in Oregon's history. Tyler sat in the front row of the courtroom, flanked by his mother Sarah and Vincent Romano, watching as 23 wrongful conviction cases were presented to the federal judge. The scope of Walsh's corruption had staggered even seasoned FBI investigators. For nearly 7 years, he had systematically targeted families who lacked the resources to fight back effectively. Single mothers working multiple jobs, immigrant families afraid to challenge authority, elderly citizens living on fixed incomes. Each frame-up had been carefully planned, each piece of planted evidence designed to ensure convictions that would advance Walsh's career while destroying innocent lives. Tyler's testimony had been the key that unlocked everything else. When federal investigators examined his father's hidden files, they discovered that Michael Mitchell had documented Walsh's pattern with journalistic precision. Bank records showing unexplained income, photographs of Walsh meeting with known criminals, evidence logs that didn't match chain of custody requirements. Everything Tyler's father had needed to expose the corruption, but hadn't lived long enough to publish. Sarah Mitchell stepped to the witness stand with the composure of someone who had waited years for this moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of both her medical training and her law enforcement background. "I left the Portland Police Bureau 7 years ago because I witnessed Detective Walsh planting drugs during a raid. When I reported it through proper channels, I was told to keep quiet or face professional consequences." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed federal attorney named Rebecca Chen, guided Sarah through her testimony with surgical precision. "You chose to leave law enforcement rather than be complicit in corruption?" Chen asked. Sarah nodded firmly. "I became a nurse because I couldn't save the system from the inside, but I could still save lives through medicine." Vincent Romano's testimony painted a picture of a family business that had been targeted not for criminal activity, but for their independence from Walsh's informal protection racket. The Romano Shipping Company had refused Walsh's demands for regular payments in exchange for being left alone. That refusal had made them enemies of a corrupt detective who viewed their legitimate success as a personal insult. Tyler watched as defendant after defendant was brought before the judge for sentence reduction, or complete exoneration. James Chen, a restaurant owner who had spent 2 years in prison for drug possession charges that were now proven false. Maria Santos, a single mother who had lost custody of her children based on planted evidence. Robert Thompson, an elderly man whose life savings had been seized under civil forfeiture laws based on Walsh's fabricated cases. When Tyler's turn came to address the court, he walked to the witness stand carrying his father's locket and a folder of documents. The federal prosecutor had explained that while his testimony wasn't legally necessary for conviction, it would help the judge understand the full scope of the case's impact on Portland's community. Tyler opened the folder and pulled out a letter written in his father's handwriting. "This is something my father wrote but never got to publish." Tyler began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. He called it the courage to see truth. He wrote that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified of the consequences. The courtroom was completely silent as Tyler read his father's words aloud. Detective Walsh represents a system that has forgotten its purpose. Law enforcement exists to protect all citizens equally, not to decide which families deserve justice and which deserve persecution. When police become predators, ordinary citizens must become heroes. Tyler looked directly at Walsh, who sat at the defendant's table with his head down. "My father died before he could finish exposing your crimes. But he taught me that truth always finds a way. You tried to destroy families who couldn't fight back, but you underestimated how much people care about justice when they finally see what's really happening." After the sentencing hearing, where Walsh received a 15-year federal prison sentence, Tyler stood on the courthouse steps with his mother and Vincent Romano. Sarah had been offered a position heading internal affairs for the reformed Portland Police Bureau, a chance to build the accountability systems that might prevent another Walsh from emerging. Vincent placed his hand on Tyler's shoulder as reporters gathered around them. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "But more importantly, 23 innocent families get to go home tonight because a 12-year-old boy chose courage over safety." Tyler fingered his father's locket and thought about legacy, not the kind that comes from fame or fortune, but the kind that comes from making choices that honor the people who came before and protect the people who come after. His father's investigation was finally complete, but Tyler's understanding of justice was just beginning. 6 months after Detective Walsh's conviction, Tyler Mitchell stood at the podium in the main auditorium of Portland Children's Hospital, looking out at an audience of medical staff, social workers, and community advocates. The Michael Mitchell Memorial Fund Scholarship Ceremony had drawn nearly 300 people, all of them connected by the belief that courage could be cultivated and justice could be taught. Sarah Mitchell watched from the front row as her son, now 13 and noticeably taller, addressed the crowd with a confidence that reminded her powerfully of his father. The transformation wasn't just physical. Tyler carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had looked into the face of corruption and chosen to act rather than remain silent. Tyler began by holding up his father's locket, the silver catching the auditorium lights. 6 months ago, I was just a kid walking home from the library who happened to see something wrong. I didn't think of myself as brave or heroic. I was scared and confused, and I just wanted to do what my father would have done. He paused, scanning the audience until his eyes found Vincent Romano, who sat with his wife and grandson in the third row. Mr. Romano could have dismissed me as just another kid with an overactive imagination. Instead, he listened, and that decision changed everything. Not just for his family, but for 23 other families who got their lives back because truth finally had a chance to speak. The scholarship recipients, 12 young people from Portland's most underserved communities, sat together in the second row. Each of them had demonstrated academic excellence and community leadership, despite facing significant obstacles. The fund, endowed jointly by the Romano family and Sarah's colleagues at the hospital, would provide full college scholarships with a focus on journalism, law enforcement, and social work. Tyler continued his speech, his voice growing stronger with each word. "My mother left police work because she saw corruption and couldn't stop it from within. But today she's back in law enforcement, leading internal affairs with the Portland Police Bureau. She's building systems to make sure that what happened with Detective Walsh can never happen again. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes as Tyler spoke about her return to policing. It had taken months of soul-searching to accept the position, but ultimately she had realized that running from broken systems only guaranteed they would remain broken. Change required people willing to stay and fight, even when the fight seemed impossible. Vincent Romano took the stage next, his remarks focusing on the relationship between business success and community responsibility. The Romano family has operated in Portland for 96 years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of nearly a century of local history. We've succeeded because this community supported us, and we've tried to support this community in return. Tyler Mitchell reminded us that real strength comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of the first Michael Mitchell Courage in Journalism Award, given annually to a local reporter who demonstrates exceptional bravery and investigative work. This year's recipient was Elena Rodriguez, whose expose of housing discrimination had led to major policy reforms and criminal charges against 3 property management companies. As the audience filed out, Tyler found himself standing once again with Vincent Romano and his mother in the hospital lobby where this all began. The irony wasn't lost on any of them that they were gathered in the place where Sarah had once fought to save Vincent's grandson, creating the human connection that would later make Vincent trust Tyler's warning. Vincent handed Tyler a small wrapped package. "Your father's birthday would have been next week. This belonged to my grandfather when he first came to America. He said it would remind him that courage travels across generations, even when we can't see the path it takes." Tyler unwrapped the package to find an antique compass, its brass surface worn smooth by decades of handling. On the bow was an engraved inscription in Italian, which Vincent translated. It says, "True north never changes, even when everything around you does. Your moral compass led you to speak truth when silence would have been safer." That's the kind of courage that changes the world. Sarah drove Tyler home through the streets of Portland, both of them quiet as they processed the weight of the ceremony and the responsibilities that came with being remembered as heroes. As they pulled into their driveway, Tyler asked the question that had been building in his mind all evening. "Mom, do you think Dad would have been proud of what we did?" Sarah turned off the engine and looked at her son, seeing Michael's determination in Tyler's eyes and his own unique strength in the way Tyler had grown into his conscience. "Your father spent his life believing that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose courage over comfort. You proved him right." That night, Tyler sat at his father's old desk and opened a new journal. On the first page, he wrote about the difference between being a hero and being heroic. Heroes, he wrote, are made by circumstances and chance. But being heroic is a choice that anyone can make. Anytime truth needs a voice and justice needs a champion. Have you ever witnessed something wrong and had to choose between speaking up or staying silent? How do you find the courage to do what's right when the cost might be high? Like and subscribe to Heart Stories, where ordinary people discover their extraordinary strength, and share your own story of courage in the comments below.